top predators evolve again. It's a vicious story of kill and be killed, of escape and capture. The story of Jaws. The most powerful set of jaws today belongs to the Crocodilia order, which includes crocodiles and alligators. Their fearsome bite snaps shut with 3,000 pounds of bite force power. On the 1/8 inch point of the sharpest front tooth, 24,000 pounds per square inch. Twice as much power as the average nail gun. The crocodile can feed on animals as large as water buffalo and wildebeest. For millions of years, crocodiles and every creature with a powerful jaw has held a huge advantage in the struggle for survival.
The presence of a jaw changes the playing field altogether. What it means is that you're not limited to feeding on things that already fit in your mouth. Such a great asset that the vertebrates with jaws outcompeted everything else. In the history of the vertebrates, there's probably nothing quite as important as the evolution of a jaw.
Jaws are everywhere. But once there were no jaws at all. How could one anatomical feature, a simple muscled hinge, drive so much of evolution, literally shaping many animals we see today? The answers begin with the first bite. In 1979, these fossils were identified as evidence of the world's first known Jaws attack.
This is the first bite mark produced by a jaw, absolutely. It's a lot harder to identify who did the biting.
The victims were tiny creatures from 530 million years ago, just a few inches long, called trilobites. Something had taken a bite out of their side. Or had they? Where were the biters? The hunt was on. At stake was proof of one of the main pillars of evolution. The widely accepted theory that predation, animal attacks on others for food, is the most powerful force in evolution, because it means that prey animals that don't develop defenses die out. Those that do, live.
Predation has driven a variety of traits from social behavior to the evolution of armor. You can see the coevolution and the escalation of this predator and prey interaction by the evolution of very thick shells as predation increased.
But if predation was the driver of evolution in the Cambrian, who or what were the predators that attacked and fed on the trilobites? A break in the case came in 1981, when scientists pieced together 4 fossils, thought for 70 years to be 4 different animals, and theorized that they were in fact one giant Cambrian beast. The discovery of a complete fossil a year later proved the theory. They called it Anomalocaris, the strange shrimp. In the Cambrian seas, it was a monster.
We're talking up to 2 meters in length, and compared to your average trilobite during the Cambrian, which might just be a few centimeters, they really would have dwarfed them.
Geologist Bruce Lieberman presides over one of the biggest Cambrian fossil collections in the world at the University of Kansas. One treasure from the vault is this mouth part from Anomalocaris, showing clearly the world's earliest known form of a jaw.
It's almost like one of those pineapple slices that you'd get in a can. It's sort of a circle, and inside there's a smaller circle where the hole for the mouth is. And around that inner circle, there are these little jagged things like teeth.
The strange jaw couldn't close all the way, but it could tighten and clamp down, like a nutcracker. Was it the biter? Lauren Babcock's team at The Ohio State University went looking for a match and found it.
We discovered that the sizes and the shapes of the bite marks matched exactly the size and the shape of the mouth parts of Anomalocaridids.
The discovery was huge. It provided solid, direct evidence that the Cambrian time period was a time of kill and be killed, of evolve or die.
So it's clear sort of smoking gun of a predator-prey interaction, and that's rare in the fossil record. And it's very important that it's from the Cambrian explosion.
In response to Anomalocaris jaws, trilobites would evolve new defenses over time, possibly even including chemical weapons.
We see, for example, the rise of greater spines or thickened spines, and maybe spines that held poison glands. And this is really the first clear and convincing evidence that predation was a driving force in evolution, even from the very beginning of the Paleozoic era.
Anomalocaris had everything going for it. But after 10 million years on top, the beast disappears from the fossil record for reasons no one yet understands. While the horseshoe crab is a distant relative, the first killer jaw would have no descendants.
Evolution is, in many instances, a battleground. I mean, let's face it, life is intense out there. Species have to constantly keep changing in order to prevent themselves from going extinct. It becomes a matter of life and death, really, whether or not individuals can adapt in time to this constantly changing environment.
Jaws would evolve again in a huge way, in a completely new line of animals, fish. It is 430 million years ago, and fish are the first animals to have a backbone, the first vertebrates. They are the ancestors of all vertebrates, including us, but they have no jaws, only openings too primitive to be called mouths. They feed by literally swimming into their food, or by stirring up mud, counting and finding suspended particles for sustenance. But in one group of fish after another, a change occurs. Primitive fish have bony arches that hold up their gills. The fossil record suggests that over time, natural selection favored fish whose arches were set forward until they were able to grasp the food trying to wriggle away. The bottom arch swiveled. The top arch provided stability. It was a structural change that enabled survival and, with much variation, has persisted to this day in thousands of species, including our own. An extinct group of fish called placoderms were the first to develop jaws. This predatory edge made one of them the T-Rex of the seas. The exact nature of the beast's jaws has been a mystery until now.
I'm standing next to Dunkleosteus torelli. It got up to 20 feet long and probably weighed a ton or more. and it was highly predatory.
Mark Westneat, zoologist at the Field Museum in Chicago, has been working to unravel the mysteries of Dunkleosteus. Why did its jaws grow so large? How did its strange, toothless jaw operate?
Dunkleosteus and other placoderms don't have teeth. They have a large, bony lower jaw that has an enamel covering along the rim, and it is quite sharp at the tip. It's like a meat cleaver.
Westneat believes the jaws grew so large and the blades so sharp to crush the hard outer shells of invertebrates that filled the oceans at this time.
We think that it had a scissor-like action where the two plates would meet one another and slide past one another, much like a pair of scissors.
Westneat devised an ingenious plan combining several methods to decode the biocomanics of Dunk's bite. First, he used forensic reconstruction techniques to model Dunk's jaw and neck muscles, took measurements and calculated their power. This led Westneat and his team to a startling discovery. Dunk had muscles pulling both sides of its jaw up and back. Essentially, a perfect example of the modern engineering structure, the 4-bar linkage, used to multiply force in everything from pruning shears to steam locomotive drivetrains. This two-muscle opening system rapidly opened the mouth hugely wide and slammed it shut just as fast. Intrigued, Westneat's team built a 1/3 scale model of the jaw to observe the bite in action.
We simulate the muscle properties, the speed and force of contraction of these muscles using properties from modern-day shark muscle. Many vertebrate muscles have very similar muscle properties, and so we think that's a reasonably accurate reconstruction of what was powering the Dunkleosteus skull.
The final computer calculations stunned the team. Dunk's bite took just 70 milliseconds, creating an inrush of water and a bite force of 1,300 pounds. Dunk's bite fell like a guillotine, the most ferocious of any sea animal ever. The prey wouldn't stand a chance. But, like Anomalocaris before, Dunk went extinct, along with the scissor blade jaw. Its disappearance, another scientific mystery.
Extinction is a very powerful creative force in evolution. Extinction will almost inevitably open up new niches that can then be colonized by other species.
Dunk's niche as top predator would rapidly be filled by a creature that would succeed with a new kind of jaw, one that still hunts to this day: sharks. 350 million years ago, Dunkleosteus, the fish with the most powerful bite of all time, disappears from the fossil record. Soon, sharks would rise to take Dunk's niche as top predator. Why did sharks survive and Dunk fail? The earliest sharks were probably lunch meat for Dunkleosteus.
Sharks weren't always the top predator. Based on the fossil record, we believe that sharks have been around roughly 430 to 450 million years. And they've been around longer than any other group of vertebrates on the planet today.
Biologist Dan Huber's fascination with sharks started early.
When I was about 8 years old, a relative of mine was attacked by a shark while surfing off the east coast of Florida. And it just caused this tremendous curiosity in me, and I grew up hanging out by the shark tank at the New York Aquarium.
In the hunt for clues to the shark's survival, Dan Huber set out to make the first detailed scientific measurements of the shark's bite. Instead of using a potentially dangerous live shark specimen, Huber got his hands on the head of a dead sand tiger shark that got tangled in a fishing line. His aim? Construct a precise virtual shark jaw inside the computer and study the bite from the safety of a desk chair. The first step to modeling the jaw is a high-resolution CT scan.
Using these types of modeling techniques, we can actually get estimates of the maximum performance or maximum bite force of animals like sharks.
The system produces a digital version of the shark's skull and an accurate foundation for the computer model. Next, Huber dissects his specimen, carefully measuring each muscle that powers the jaw. The muscle data is then overlaid onto the CT scan's skeletal blueprint, and together, bone and muscle form a complete 3D virtual jaw. The cyber shark is now ready for its virtual, numbers only, bite. When the numbers are crunched, they reveal a surprising fact.
One thing that might surprise some people is that pound for pound, if we compare them to historical predators like Dunkleosteus, for example, they really don't bite all that hard.
The sharks Huber modeled only produced bite forces of 500 to 600 pounds, less than half the power of Dunk. So if sharks can't dominate with biting power, why have they been so successful? For biologist Cheryl Wilga at the University of Rhode Island, the answers begin with a body built for speed.
Think of a shark swimming really fast, chasing its prey. It has this nice hydrodynamic torpedo-shaped profile, which allows them to very quickly maneuver in any direction.
Sharks have no bones to restrict their flow. They are built almost entirely of the kind of flexible cartilage we have in our nose. And the shark's jaw placement, neatly tucked low and back, reduces drag. Wilga's after the first microsecond analysis of how the shark bite works. She's studying a small, relatively docile shark called the spiny dogfish. To capture the lightning-quick bite, Wilga sets up a special slow-motion video camera. And then the bait, a slice of herring.
She took it. All right, head shaking. That's pretty good.
A close-up examination of the video reveals the 5-step shark bite, unique in all of nature. Wilga replays the 5-part shark bite with a live and sedated dogfish.
What you see when the shark is swimming is this nice smooth profile here. And when he comes up to food, he elevates the cranium, he depresses the lower jaw, and then protrudes both the upper and the lower jaw away from the cranium. And then when they're done feeding, everything goes back underneath the cranium, and there's a nice smooth profile again. And all this happens in 50 to 70 milliseconds.
The scientists call it jaw protrusion. It gives the shark a small but important advantage.
You can equate this to, say, a sprint race. If the shark can thrust out its jaws just that much further to grab the prey, he's the winner by far. Just that little bit makes a huge difference.
Sharks were fast. Shark jaws could reach out. And sharks evolved teeth perfectly suited to their task.
Back in the day, sharks had small, tiny, ice pick-like teeth, more for grasping than anything else. But as several different groups evolved, teeth became bigger, but more importantly, it's the shape of the teeth. If you have a big triangle-shaped tooth that's serrated like a steak knife, it's easy to jab a steak knife into the prey.
Razor-sharp shark's teeth also have evolved the amazing ability to regenerate throughout the fish's lifetime.
And in fact, the teeth are so sharp that you generally have to wear some kind of heavy-duty glove in order to get close to them. And you can kind of see, as we open up the jaws, there's the teeth that are up front. That's the row of teeth that they actually use to capture their food. But behind each of those functional teeth, there's 6, 7, even 8 teeth waiting to pop into place like a conveyor belt. So that as a shark captures its food and teeth can get ripped out, sharper teeth are ready to pop right into place so that they can keep on hunting without missing a beat.
By any measure, one of the most successful life forms of all time, the shark has remained the top predator of the seas for over 300 million years. Its jaws, unmatched. But successful evolution is about the right tools for the right environment. A new kind of jaw would evolve when one lineage of fish took a bold step and moved onto dry land. 300 million years after sharks became the top predator of the seas, T-Rex was the top predator on land. But the T-Rex jaw was not descended from sharks at all. How did it happen? How did T-Rex get its bite? And how could one line of fish like these, with backbones and skeletons, but no bite to speak of, survive on land?
So the early fish, they were living in shallow water. Competition was probably intense for food. If you can gain food in new ways, that's always an advantage.
Harvard biologists Charles Marshall and Molly Markey study the strange transitional creatures that lived in shallow water 370 million years ago. They were fish, but they seemed to be on their way to becoming the world's first reptiles.
They had fins with fin tails on them. They had gills. And then their fins started to take on structures that enabled them to support their bodies on the bottom. And so it looks like they were beginning to locomote on the bottom using their proto-limbs.
Marshall's research reveals that these limbed creatures, called tetrapods, evolved jaws that were also more reptile than fish. This computer simulation, based on fossil skull measurements, shows the early tetrapod jaw in action.
They're biting, not sucking, which is really interesting. Fish, for the most part, suck. Because water is very viscous, it supports the food particles well. They open mouths rapidly, which pulls a column of water with the food in it into their mouths. It's possible these guys were acquiring food in a new way, which required biting in the water.
This basic life form combination, limbs, a skeleton, and a strong bite, set a successful pattern for many creatures to come, including us. Human beings still have the same form of jaw. 10 million years after they first emerged, tetrapods, having already evolved the biting jaw, were well suited to make the move on land. And once they made the move, their success was stunning. Fast forward 240 million years and thousands of species have inherited this new biting jaw. By the age of dinosaurs, survival is a bigger, faster, stronger game. Big-jawed meat-eaters on the offense, small-jawed herbivores on defense.
Carnivorous dinosaurs evolved better weapons for killing. More powerful jaws, teeth that were more effective for slicing through flesh, bigger claws, and so on. Herbivorous dinosaurs evolved defenses against carnivorous dinosaurs. Gigantic sizes, horns, spikes, or armor. In many ways, the age of dinosaurs can be thought of as an evolutionary arms race.
T-Rex certainly looks like the most ferocious jawbiter of all time. A typical T-Rex jawbone is 6 feet long, stuffed with up to 50 long, curved teeth at any one time. Like sharks, if those teeth broke off, T-Rex just grew them back. But a rising scientific theory says that T-Rex was really a wimp, whose arms were too short, legs were too slow, and eyes were too weak to bring down moving animals.
A few paleontologists have argued that Tyrannosaurus rex was a scavenger rather than a hunter. These scientists envision Tyrannosaurus rex not as the fierce hunter that we all grew up with, but rather wandering across the landscape, sniffing out dead carcasses, something like a 10,000-pound vulture.
Gregory Erickson is a paleobiologist and a champion of T-Rex. He is having none of it.
Tyrannosaurus rex arguably was the most lethal terrestrial animal ever to have existed. It could easily bite through a bone like this.
Erickson first became involved in the T-Rex debate in the 1990s, when as a graduate student, he analyzed this rare find, a Triceratops pelvis riddled with exactly 58 bite marks. By matching casts of the indents to fossilized T-Rex teeth, he identified the biter as T-Rex. At first glance, the bite marks seemed to support the scavenger theory. T-Rex clearly took its time with this meal, nibbling the meat off the bone. But Erickson saw a chance to use the bite marks to establish a minimum bite force for T-Rex, and to prove that T-Rex's teeth could do more than just scratch a bone.
The teeth of Tyrannosaurus rex really stand out among dinosaur teeth. This animal had the largest teeth of any dinosaur. This is the root, this is the crown. So over half of this tooth was actually usable by this animal. So we have 6 inches of tooth that they could work with. And they had a very interesting profile to them, reminiscent of, say, a steak knife or something like that. They even have the serrations on the front and the back. But this really isn't like a steak knife. If you look down at the end of the tooth, you see that it is much more rounded. It's shaped more like a railroad spike or a lethal banana even.
Erickson had the teeth. He had the bite marks. Now Erickson set out to recreate, for the first time anywhere, the actual bite of T-Rex. There were hurdles to overcome. How big would a tooth be that made the marks? Which tooth was it? And the trickiest question, how could he build a meaningful replica of a T-Rex tooth? Erickson took T-Rex's reptile status as a clue.
All reptile teeth are made of the same materials. They have an outer enamel shell, which is a really hard material. And inside that, the bulk of the tooth is dentine, which is a type of bone, essentially. And together, those two tissues act as a rigid body. Our replica here had to be as stiff and as hard as actual Tyrannosaur teeth. For the purposes of our experiment, we used bronze and aluminum. Bronze is a common casting material, and with the addition of aluminum, it made it a harder structure. So we had the size covered here. We also had the material properties.
Erickson fixed his T-Rex tooth to a hydraulic press. His plan? To measure precisely how much power it would take to make the half-inch divot seen in the Triceratops bone. A modern cow pelvis stands in for the prey.
The microstructure of cow pelvic bones are identical to the bones from Triceratops.
All right, reset the display scope.
Through trial and error,
0 force.
Erickson adjusts the torque until he finds a precise match for the power of the real-world bite.
Actuator off.
And running.
Fire away.
Fire.
Jeez. Punched right through it, Paul. Oh. Man, you wouldn't want to get bitten by that. How much force, Paul?
About 3,000 pounds.
3,000 pounds.
Averaging many trials, Erickson's final result was 3,400 pounds of bite force, matching today's crocodiles for the most powerful jaws ever on Earth. And that's just a start.
Probably both sides of the dentition were engaged when this animal was biting too, so it's probably twice that much, which would put tyrannosaurs as having bite forces at approximately twice that of a large alligator today. It doesn't mean the tyrannosaur was biting at full force. I suspect that tyrannosaurs could generate bite forces perhaps 3, 4, 5 times greater.
Erickson's work doesn't prove that T-Rex didn't occasionally scavenge, but it does show that this ferocious giant clearly had all the tools for the job of top predator. In the shadow of the dinosaurs, a different branch of the first creatures to crawl on land were evolving in their own way, with their own particular jaws and bite. When T-Rex and other big dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago, the mammals' time had come, and their bite would be our bite. 65 million years ago, the dinosaur world order collapsed, most likely in the wake of a cataclysmic asteroid impact. Millions of species vanished from Earth in an event scientists call the Cretaceous Tertiary, KT, extinction. For tiny mammals, KT is the best thing that could have happened.
Mammals had lived alongside dinosaurs for over 160 million years, but had almost always remained small. After the KT extinction, it was like an ecological release for mammals. Suddenly, they found themselves in a world with many open niches, and anytime there's an open niche, some organism will evolve to exploit it. That's what mammals did, and that's why we're standing here today.
The dinosaurs' demise left room for a new top predator, and mammals, equipped with a new kind of jaw, would exploit the open niche. The key to their success was specialized teeth.
But there's an important difference between the teeth of dinosaurs and the teeth of mammals. Dinosaur teeth are all peg-like and they all look the same. Within a mouth, they just all look like a bunch of pegs. But mammal teeth look different in different parts of the mouth.
Today, the mammal jaw has evolved to involve teeth that can extract the maximum amount of nutrition from many kinds of food. Incisors at the front for cutting and nibbling the food. Premolars set behind to tear it apart. Molars way at the back that compact against each other to grind the food down into digestible bits. And the killer teeth, the canines, named not for dogs, but for carnivora, the meat eaters.
The canines are used to grab onto prey and hold them. So for obvious reasons, canines are much bigger in predatory mammals than they are in other animals. Now, the biggest canines that ever existed were on Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat.
Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, ruled the Americas from 3 million to 12,000 years ago. In the later part of its reign, this top predator most likely preyed on a physically unmatched newcomer to the scene, human beings. For scientists, Smilodon's strange and enormous 8-inch canines are a fascinating mystery. Why did these big cats evolve such extreme jaws? That's what anatomist Frank Mendel wanted to find out.
Animals don't develop structures without presumably some use for them. And so the question is, what did they do with them that would make it worth evolving in this direction?
Mendel devised the first ever practical experiment designed to answer the question, how did Smilodon kill? First, he headed to Texas for a study of Smilodon's relatives at a big cat sanctuary.
These are the closest living analogs we have for Smilodon.
Lions and tigers with 3.5-inch canines are no saber-tooths. But Mendel believes that their kill techniques will help him get closer to solving the mystery of Smilodon's bite.
Modern-day big cats bring down very large prey, sometimes 5, 6 times bigger than themselves. and they use their claws and teeth to pull themselves up until they can get a bite on the throat, and then they clamp down on the throat.
Surprisingly, the lion's bite force is relatively mild. The lion's chokehold often does not even break the skin. Scientists assume the big cats are strangling their victims, but Mendel has a different idea.
My concept is that they are squeezing on the arteries, which cause these animals to pass out in 3 to 5 seconds, applying a sleeper hold in effect. The cat must then hold that for 3 to 5 minutes to deprive the animal's brain of oxygen, and so the animal's now brain dead, and it won't fight with or give the cat any grief.
One problem for the lion is that the scent of the 5-minute kill alerts nearby scavengers to fresh food, courtesy of the lion.
If you're there with a bunch of other predators, crocodiles, hyenas, other cats, then those animals will come, if they can, and take it.
Smilodon's bite force is even less than the lion, so a 5-minute death grip is unlikely. And evidence in the fossil record suggests these big teeth could break off in a protracted battle with enormous Ice Age prey. So how did Smilodon dominate life in the Americas for nearly 3 million years? Mendel is about to find out, bringing Smilodon's killer jaws to life.
Okay, we're gonna take this articulator.
A tractor stands in for Smilodon's beefy body.
Get this up on the tractor here.
And helps position the big cat's jaw correctly.
The jaws were made from a cast from a real specimen.
As a stand-in for one of Smilodon's large herbivorous prey, Mendel uses the carcass of a cow already earmarked as food for the big cats at the research facility. All the animals used here died of natural causes or were in critical condition and humanely euthanized. First, Mendel tests one prominent theory, which suggests that Smilodon might have chased down and eviscerated its prey with a disemboweling wound to the abdomen.
So the first thing we want to do is align these teeth. Here's where we want to be on this animal's belly, right about here. There's no rib here. This is abdominal wall, so this is clearly a vulnerable area. Down. Keep coming, keep coming.
Smilodon could pivot its lower jaw down a very wide 110 degrees. But even then, the 8-inch canines would only have 3 inches of clearance. Would the clearance be enough to kill?
If we can get a mouthful of skin, the canines don't actually make contact. They don't bury themselves in the belly wall at all. So this belly bite, for me at least, is a very unattractive hypothesis. It seems a bit of a stretch.
If the belly bite is out, what were the canines for? Mendel's theory goes straight for the jugular.
Pretty nasty wound here.
Why did the Ice Age predator Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, evolve his 8-inch canines? Anatomist Frank Mendel is about to test his theory that the huge daggers helped the big cat go for the throat, even though their big teeth could not survive a protracted struggle.
We've taken the articulator off the tractor, put it on the ground, and we've now placed it in front of the animal's neck. So in this case, the gate easily span the neck, no problem here. I think we're in a good position now to drive these teeth. Go ahead, guys. We're applying some pressure here, and there goes. Oh, and we certainly got penetration here with the canines. Pretty nasty wound here. Big holes.
Holes are not enough. Mendel checks to see if his replica Smilodon jaw cut any vital arteries for a quick kill.
I'm gonna make an incision between the bites, get through the skin. A lot of blood here. Oh yeah, there is a hole right behind the airway, right where the carotids live. It's It's a very quick, penetrating wound. This animal would have died within seconds.
Mendel believes his work explains the long-standing mystery of why Smilodon evolved such huge canines. Unlike lions, who need up to 5 minutes to kill their prey, Smilodon's 8-inch stilettos allowed them to kill and eat almost instantly, preventing scavengers from stealing their meal.
Saber-toothed cats, I think they drove these teeth through the animal's neck, and the serrations on of these teeth cut one of those carotids. It would bleed out almost instantly and therefore kill it more quickly than the sleeper hold of modern-day big cats.
Smilodon became extinct at the end of the Ice Age 12,000 years ago, perhaps due to the sudden change of the climate, or perhaps because early human hunters outcompeted them for prey. As the new top predators, humans were fearsome, but their jaws were puny. How did humans succeed with jaws that are now so small that even our primate cousins have bigger bites?
Humans are anatomical wimps. Compared to a chimpanzee, we are weaklings.
Scott McGraw is an evolutionary anatomist who studies primates and the extinct relatives of humans, hominids.
If you look at the great apes today, gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, and bonobos, they're chewing, in many cases, tough, fibrous vegetation or hard fruits, requiring large, powerful jaws and jaw muscles. And if you look at the size of their teeth, you can see that the molars of these animals are larger than modern humans.
Sometime around 1.8 million years ago, our hominid ancestors, who had been standing on 2 legs for some 4 million years, lost most of their body hair, grew their brains, and walked right out of Africa to spread across the world. Today, Homo sapiens, us, dominate all life on Earth. We did it with intelligence, not brute strength, and built tools that lessen the need for powerful jaws.
During human evolution, there was clearly a transition from physical strength and the strength in biting, for example, to using our brains. Essentially, we were able to outwit our predators, and so there was a transfer of weaponry from the physical individual to the tools that that individual used.
Through 2 million years of tool-making, our jaws have shrunk dramatically, as there was no need to sustain their enormous size. Our jaws are commonly no longer even big enough to house the wisdom teeth that grow in young adults. In the future, scientists theorize wisdom teeth may disappear altogether.
Our teeth have shrunk. Our jaws have shrunk. Our chewing muscles have shrunk. And that has to do with our relaxed diet. We can just shove something in the microwave. We don't need to have big, robust teeth and jaws and muscles to process our food. We don't even need teeth, just a straw.
For 500 million years, many top predators have had the strongest bite in their environment. Today, it earns them a place in the zoo. But 400 million years of evolution proves that the only constant is change.
The thing that's exciting about evolution is that at every generation, the rules are slightly different than they were for the generation before. So sometimes the strategy that you have in place now isn't necessarily going to work in the future.
Perhaps we humans should not get too comfortable with our place on top.
Where predators reign and live by a different set of rules.
The sharks are different.
spend days at sea, far from the shipping lanes, and thousands of kilometers from the nearest continent. A team of explorers travels deep into the South Pacific toward a distant human outpost. Then, a tiny island appears in the mist.
And here it is, the famous Pitcairn Island, what must be one of the most remote inhabited islands on the planet.
It's called Adamstown. We're just about there.
Few people have visited Pitcairn, let alone filmed here. To most outsiders, it's a complete mystery.
We know very little about this island, but we know almost nothing about what's going underwater.
That is what this team is here to change. Marine ecologist Enrique Sala has scoured the seas to find and help protect the ocean's last unspoiled places.
I want to show to the world what the ocean was like hundreds of years ago and why we have to preserve them.
Pitcairn's waters could be hiding a lost piece of the ocean's past. To find out, Enrique has built an all-star team of scientists.
This will be a good home for the next month.
7 seasoned explorers and 1 young adventurer on his very first mission at sea.
Former nerd.
You evolved.
You look like a former nerd.
Leading the ground expedition is National Geographic explorer Mike Fay.
And we're already checking out the bow for camping.
You've been traveling across flat ground for the last 9 months.
Mike has trekked through the world's wildest places.
As far as the eye can see, there are no humans.
To see what life is like without us. Now, Enrique's team has joined forces with the Pew Environment Group. If they can crack the code of this unexplored world and even protect it, they may unlock secrets that can help marine life everywhere. It's a new role for Pitcairn, a place known for its history. Today's islanders are descendants of the most famous renegades in history. The mutineers of the HMS Bounty.
Hi. Hello. Enrique. Clarice, nice meeting you.
Over 2 centuries ago, British sailors mutinied against their captain and fled to this uninhabited island with a few Tahitian men and women. They spent the rest of their lives in hiding. Today, their descendants are still here. Some carry the bloodline of Fletcher Christian, the mutiny's leader.
You can imagine when the mutineers arrived on this uninhabited island, you know, they're planning on living here forever.
But luckily enough,
and you think, wow, that's crazy, you know, that the Christians are still here.
I recognize your photo.
Hello.
Henri.
Enrique.
I'm here to welcome.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Lovely to have you here.
The community is tiny, with fewer than 60 people, and they survive in a world apart. Pitcairn is one of 4 islands tied to the community, but it's the only one with people. The nearest major landmass is New Zealand, some 5,000 kilometers away. These remote islands are graveyards to ships, home to unpredictable storms, and host to hidden threats. No one will know what they're facing until they dive below. The team heads to Ducie, the least explored of all the islands.
So we made it to Ducie Atoll, the most remote of the Pitcairn Islands. There are no people here. Nobody ever comes here.
Ducie is almost 500 kilometers east of Pitcairn. Over a kilometer across, it's barely a blip on the radar.
It's an oasis in the middle of nowhere. Kind of amazing.
This is one of the least studied reefs in the Pacific. This is going to be a first to measure the abundance and the biomass of the fish.
The world below is a total mystery. Few humans have ever seen what this team is about to.
So we jumped in the water, and I couldn't believe it. We had never seen such a healthy and beautiful coral reef anywhere in the Pacific. You had the entire ecosystem, the entire food web, right there in front of your eyes.
We saw blackjacks, surgeonfish, large groupers of different species, snappers, more eels. Then the sharks came.
And they come in numbers. Running wild over the reef. As the sharks close in, no one knows how they'll react. But Enrique's sure he's found something unusual.
Sharks are the single most important indicator for the health of a coral reef. Having sharks on the reef is like having lions on the plains in Africa.
The more sharks, the more it's like the primeval past. And this place is swarming with them. Topside, Mike Fay and his crew wonder what waits on land.
Straight ahead of here, you can see there's a rip coming out, and we're just going to go in.
Ducie is the outer island where hardly any Pitcairners go. Most people haven't really been there, and so I want to walk the entire atoll just to get kind of a notion of, you know, what are we dealing with here?
He'll have some high-tech help. Alan Turchik, the young rookie, has brought some new gear. A mini drone to photograph Ducie from the air.
So we're trying to get some high-altitude pictures using the helicopter for Mike so he can kind of see what the island looks like. It's going to be important to get some shots above so Mike can kind of see how he can make his way through the island.
The helicopter can also spot things Mike might otherwise miss. Ducie's an atoll. Its circular band of coral rings an inner lagoon. But this aerial scout could reveal more about the island.
Ah, better landing.
I'm excited about this little remote helicopter because I'm thinking, wow, this thing is unbelievable. I mean, it's like this little space machine, you know? God, we can fly this thing over these islands and you can basically do recce's with it.
Is there anything special that you want, Mike? Any pictures?
That point over there, that seems to be like one of the main breeding areas for the petrels.
Okay.
And so this thing just goes bzzz. I was like, you know, what's the range on the radio of that thing? You know, because I'm thinking thing's getting pretty far away, and it looks like it's getting carried by the wind, you know. And he's like, no, it's pretty good, you know, and he's still kind of in virtual mode, looking at the screen, and I'm looking at the helicopter, and I'm thinking that thing is like whipping away from this island.
Alan quickly discovers his drone has gone rogue.
And then all of a sudden you see like panic mode start to set in. He's like, and he's like, I don't know what direction it is. I can't see which direction it's going. And he starts running after this thing. And that thing is woof. And that was the last we saw of the helicopter. It was gone. So much for the helicopter. Too much wind. Helicopter's lost at sea. MIA.
You may be a decent pilot, but you're not that great.
With the helicopter lost, Mike will have to explore Ducie the hard way, one step at a time. Just offshore, the dive team faces challenges of its own. Sharks dominate this perfect reef, and the numbers are overwhelming. As they close in, Enrique knows that anything can happen. This close contact could come at a price. Ducie's sharks are not shy, and they're lightning fast. In a second, they could bite the divers before anyone even noticed. The team doesn't scare easily. Likely, the sharks are just curious. Chances are, these sharks have never seen a human before.
You don't belong there. We're aliens in this environment. It's like being in outer space, except with life.
The more sharks there are, the better it is for the reef. We used to believe that on a coral reef, the biomass of small fish outweighs that of large predators like sharks. But Enrique finds that the opposite is true on an untouched reef.
Imagine that you go to Africa and you find more than one lion per every wildebeest and zebra and giraffe. You would say it's impossible. Pristine coral reefs are like this. Predators dominate. Oh, this place is wild. There were 2 white-tip sharks and 4 greater sharks and thousands of manue eating everywhere and swimming in the water column. It was like an aquarium. really wonderful place. Really pristine. As far as we could see, there were these pale blue corals, like giant roses, covering all of the bottom. Every time our team get out of the water, they had this huge smile. They were laughing. They were talking about all the fish that we saw. It was really extraordinary.
Like the sharks themselves, the evidence is overwhelming. Ducie's reef is an underwater Eden. Back on land, the island is a whole other world.
It was hot and muggy and sunny. You think, oh, we're on this beautiful atoll and it's paradise. Well, when you're walking those transects, it's not paradise at all. It's hell. We're here on Ducie Island, surveying petrels and I think it's seabirds. You don't quite think of where they nest, but on this particular island, they nest in this Turnifordia forest, which is pretty dense stuff. Here's one. Little Murphy. Hey, guy, what you doing?
Like many seabirds, petrels thrive on Ducie. But Mike discovers something disturbing. Dead birds lie scattered on the beach.
Looks like they got eaten by something. That's not a good sign. 3rd dead bird. 4th dead bird. Immediately, we start seeing dead petrels. See, something looks like it's been chewing on the bones here.
But what is killing them?
dead birds all over this place.
The carnage is worse at the lagoon.
Yes, we have like 130 dead birds here. And what's amazing is they're all just about fledged out. They all died about the same time, almost like a disease came along or something. You know, and you think, that's freaking crazy. It's like bird after bird after bird after bird after bird after bird. These guys are just about, they were fledged. It's like, what kills birds like that?
Mike heads into the forest to search for answers. It doesn't take him long to find clues.
Look at this little guy, he's just stuck in the middle of this weedy patch. And they're nesting in this just ground herb in the boiling sun, and these chicks are just like covered with the fruits, like honey-coated fruits, and they're covered in them. They're obviously never going to be able to fly.
The island has been invaded by an alien plant. A weed that may have been brought by birds or by man. Now it's grown out of control, trapping birds in its sticky goo.
You think, God, one little thing like that completely changes the island.
Mike can't be sure it killed all the birds, but one thing is clear. Ducey's landscape has been altered, and its future is uncertain. After exploring the reef, Enrique knows there's no time to waste. Ducey's waters are untainted, but for how long?
Ducey had the clearest water and the healthiest coral reef we have ever seen.
It's 100 meters. It's unbelievable.
And we all left Ducey with one thought. This place has to be protected. There is no other option. How many places like Ducey are left?
You know, when you see corals just layered on top of each other like that.
Beautiful sight, huh?
Isn't it nice?
Wow, yeah.
But ahead lies another island, where life is strangely different.
And we are arriving to Henderson Island, which is a raised atoll, and now it's covered by impenetrable forest.
Henderson is about 200 kilometers from Pitcairn, and at 7 kilometers across, the largest of the 4 islands. Like Ducey, it's now uninhabited, but people have spent time here before.
Replay.
Enrique wants to see if they've left a mark.
We're going to do our first dive now at Henderson Island, and the reef looks really gorgeous. We can see from the boats, and the water is so clear. Damselfish, butterfly fish, moray eels, these large red snappers, which were very inquisitive. And probably the most exciting thing at Henderson was the sharks.
Like at Ducey, sharks swarm Henderson's reef. But here, they're bigger and bolder. And no one knows what they'll do next. The sharks move in toward Enrique and the team.
The sharks were very curious, and they came to check us out very closely.
Almost too curious. They're clearly bolder than the sharks at Ducey. Enrique soon realizes why.
We were diving with this diving gear that doesn't produce any bubbles, so we were very silent.
Soon the team is surrounded by sharks.
They come, wow, really close to us to check us out. It was a really exciting dive.
The heart-pumping encounter drives Enrique to explore further.
We cheated death once again.
to see if sharks patrol even further below. On the ship, Alan Turchik prepares a deep water camera.
This is a drop cam. It can go down to the deepest part of the ocean, and has been actually down to the Marianas Trench. Hopefully we'll see some fish come up and check it out.
For the young explorer, it's a chance to redeem himself after losing the chopper on Ducie.
This is probably the first time anything's been filmed this deep before, in this area, for sure.
By day's end, they'll see what life is like 600 meters below, and may even discover creatures no one has seen before. Mike Fay is anxious to hit the beach. For a terrestrial explorer, Henderson is a treasure island.
Henderson, from a land-based perspective, is certainly one of the most amazing places in the entire Pacific Ocean. So you've got this huge coral plateau that's 100 feet above sea level that's covered with this vegetation. There are still many species of plants to be discovered on this island. For me, this place is going to be awesome. I know it is, you know. Okay, I'm here on Henderson Island, up on the plateau. It's only about 100 feet above sea level, but it's a hard coral bed up here. This coral is like razor sharp. This place is like walking through a mountain of broken glass. Then you are dealing with this very dense vegetation.
It's practically primeval, a living example of an ancient world. UNESCO designated Henderson a World Heritage Site because of its rare native birds, like crakes and fruit doves. But now they're at risk, threatened by an invasive predator.
The Polynesian rat was brought by Polynesians to almost every island in the Pacific. And one of the things they eat is young birds, and they're extremely voracious. And we've had a de-ratification on Henderson just months previous to our arrival.
A team of exterminators spread rat poison across the island. Mike's big question is if it worked.
Their objective was to get rid of 100% of the rats on this island and not kill all the endemic crakes. Our objective here is to see if the crakes are still around and see if we see no rats. And then all of a sudden you see this little black thing like flash. And I got a crake. We got the crake. The crake is right in front of me here. I'm gonna pan over to the crake. That's what we were looking for. It's a little creaky. So it looks like a chicken. It's kind of acting like a chicken, but it's this little flightless bird in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and you're looking at it. Hey, little creaky. How did he get there? And he's flightless, and he's in the middle of the ocean, you know? Crazy little bird. Those crakes are about the coolest little animals I've ever seen. Like little gnomes in the forest. A mix between a gnome and a chicken.
Mike Fay's seen something move in the thick brush.
I see a rat. I absolutely see a rat. I see a rat. You think rat, but all you've seen is this fleeting movement in this dense bush. I'm gonna take a picture of it. So I walk up really fast, and I lower my eyes, and then this rat is just sitting there on this branch. And it's like, it's a rat, it's a rat, it's a rat, it's in my brain, it's a rat, it's a rat, it's a rat, it's a rat. And then I try to take some pictures. But of course, it's like the Yeti thing, you know, UFOs, they're all blurry. In the video, you can kind of see the rat, but it's not clear, you know, it's blurry. But you can see the form of the rat clearly. And this is a huge deal. You know, if there is a rat on this island, the probability of me seeing the only rat on this gigantic island is basically zero when you round it out. Rats are definitely a bummer. No doubt about it, after all that time and effort to get rid of the rats. That means that entire dynamic between the crakes or the rails and everything else on that island that is impacted by rats, you've kind of reset the clock.
It's troubling news. Though humans left Henderson long ago, their footprint remains. So far, only the reefs seem untouched.
So we just picked up the signal from the drop cam that we put down yesterday, and so we're gonna go pick it up.
Alan Turchik retrieves the drop cam from 600 meters below.
Oh yeah, I see it. This should be interesting footage because it's the deepest we've dropped it so far since we've been out at the Pitcairn Islands.
No one knows what it may show or even if it worked.
Cool. All right, so I've been kind of scouring the drop cam footage every day, trying to look for some cool stuff.
Strange creatures appear.
And this is the first drop that I did at Henderson.
How close were you? Big animal.
Look at the plankton.
This one's 200-something meters. So I like that. He just bumps right in there. Yeah. I found, I think, gray reef sharks. They went down to about maybe 300 meters, and then anything below 600 meters, you can see these guys. Yeah.
The depths hold rarely seen sharks. They're bigger and slower than the reef sharks.
It's Sharko-vision.
Yeah.
But like their combative cousins, they rule a world that's as mysterious as it is untouched.
You know, nobody has been studying these deep sea environments before. And what we saw blew our minds.
Whoa! Check that out.
These new revelations win Alan the team's respect.
The beginning of the trip, it was pretty hard. Helicopter got lost in the ocean. It's really nice that I was able to get through all that and actually still capture some stuff that actually looks like it's going to be useful for science.
Whoa. Oh, yeah. Look at the other doors. Look at that shot.
It seemed like there were some cool species that they're interested in learning more about, and thankfully, like there's that one weird shark with the long, narrow dorsal fin, and he kind of just wandered perfectly through the frame, so luck shot, I guess, but that's still really cool.
In all, the scientists discovered 8 entirely new species of fish.
Right.
Like Ducey, Henderson's marine world is untainted. Back on the island, Mike Fay can't say the same.
I would have loved to have been able to not seen rats, but you know, just the way it is.
He makes one final survey of the coastline and comes across something even more alarming. Thousands of kilometers at sea, Mike Fay stumbles on a shocking scene. Here on a speck in the middle of the Pacific, garbage.
This is the east beach of Henderson Island here. And what is most impressive about this beach is pretty obvious. The amount of trash. It's pretty unbelievable, actually. Just littered with fishing paraphernalia. Fishing crates, containers for water, floats, nets. Everything you can imagine connected with the fishing industry. You think, you know, this is one of the most isolated islands in the entire world, really. Certainly in the Pacific, uninhabited, out in the middle of nowhere, hundreds and hundreds of miles from the nearest human habitation, and it's just covered in trash.
Though the island's far from human settlements, it may not be far from fishing. Commercial fishing could unravel all the Pitcairn Islands, leaving the islanders little hope of survival.
I've been a commercial fisherman for nearly 30 years. And if commercial fishing was allowed in here, they would just spoil it, would ruin it. It would go from what it is now to decimated within 5 years, I would think. There'd be nothing left. It's only a matter of time, really.
And I think it would be a very sad day for them to see a big longline boat around their island taking the fish that they really cherish.
The question is whether fishermen have already stripped fish from nearby waters. The team rushes back to Pitcairn to find out. Since the days of the bounty, Pitcairners have survived by fishing their waters. Enrique wants to know if Pitcairn's reefs have fared as well as the other islands.
We know what a pristine coral reef looks like. What happens when we put a small human population in one of these places?
Okay, ready?
All right, everybody, see ya.
Underwater, something's different.
There was a halo of murky water all around the island, so we could not dive at the shallow places where they promised us to see so many fish.
Should we go, Christina?
We were a little disappointed, so we decided to go deeper.
The strange conditions drive them further offshore. But at these depths, the chances are slim they'll find many fish.
Okay.
From the first plunge, however, they discover something unexpected.
There we found a new deep coral reef that had not been reported previously. Fantastic coral reef covered by healthy corals and lots of fish.
Usually, we find tropical reefs at 18 meters or less. This one is twice as deep.
We have corals deeper than what we would expect, probably because the water is so clear, more than 60 meters visibility.
Life is thriving in the crystal clear depths. The scientists survey the fish and are shocked by what they find. There are no sharks. Something here is wrong.
We didn't see any sharks. We saw some medium-sized groupers. The place doesn't seem pristine. It seems in good shape, but definitely not pristine.
Something here has taken the sharks. And no one is sure what it is. While Enrique hunts for answers, Mike Fay checks the island. It's a dangerous task. Pitcairn is wild and rugged. Climbing is treacherous.
Incredibly steep slopes, and the soils are extremely slick. And it's freaking dangerous, really dangerous, and it's scary.
In places, it's a sheer and deadly drop.
I don't want to fall off the mountain here. That's my main worry. Because if you go down here, you go down. You go down all the way.
But Mike presses on.
That is insane. Big old slide, whole freaking valley came down here.
An enormous landslide has destroyed this hilltop.
The fact that you've lost an entire hillside on a very small island, it's like you don't want huge chunks of your island falling into the sea.
The discovery drives Mike further. The wild island is showing significant wear and tear.
You know, Mutiny came here 1790, so people have been pretty intensively using this place for over 200 years. Fishing and chopping the vegetation, cultivating and building trails and roads. It's a heck of a lot of human use here.
The small human presence has changed the island, and after an unusual amount of heavy rain, maybe even the sea.
And you see this gigantic plume of soil in the ocean, emanating from what is this gigantic slide on the south side of the island. It's probably covering up everything that's living down below and killing it slowly but surely.
The impact of even a few humans can be surprisingly large.
What we see in a lot of places, particularly small places, is even a modest amount of human impact can have a pretty significant impact on the resources below.
Though the islanders fish on a small scale, other factors may be altering the reef.
People on this island, they're not only just fishing on this island, and there's a huge amount of sediment in this water. That connection between the land and the sea becomes very apparent.
But 50 years ago, it was different.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for your hospitality. We are all so happy to be back on the island. We have a little surprise. Some of you may remember Louis Marden.
Long before Enrique arrived, another National Geographic expedition came to Pitcairn.
So when Louis Marden came in 1956, he filmed with a 16mm movie camera. 60 years later, we have the film in this machine. The movie is silent, so you can talk as much as you want. Right? This is new. This is a new technique, okay?
50 years ago, the reef looked better. There was no murky shroud covering the coral. Surprisingly, that was when there were nearly 3 times as many people as today.
It was so exciting to see that footage. I was 14 when Louis Marden was here. To see, all the people, because the population was so much bigger.
Now, the entire population can fit in this room. And the community is still shrinking as young adults leave to find a future off the island. Their future is at risk, and they need a solution fast. All the islanders have is this bit of land and the boundless sea. Now, even that seems threatened. The muddy runoff is obscuring the shallow reefs, blocking out the light that sustains the corals. But could the islanders' impact really eliminate the sharks? Or is it something else? Enrique worries that commercial fishing could be closing in, and that's not good news for the Pitcairners.
The ocean is their biggest resource. If the ocean is depleted, there goes their livelihood. And this is what's on the line. Right now, we are headed to Oino, our last destination in the Pitcairn archipelago. Oino will be a good indicator of how fast we need to act to keep these places pristine.
Oino is about 120 kilometers northwest of Pitcairn. Of the 4 islands, it's closest to French Polynesia, the nearest inhabited islands and fishing fleets. Getting to Oino proves the most challenging.
We hit the worst weather we could have. Rain, rain, and more rain, strong winds, and the swell was breaking so hard on the reef that anchoring was very dangerous. And that made it really difficult for us.
Below, conditions are no less troubling. Owino's reef lacks the vitality of Henderson and Ducie. Though the fish appear healthy, Enrique realizes it's the same problem as at Pitcairn. There are no sharks. Here, where there are no people.
Why are there no sharks in this remote, uninhabited atoll in the middle of the Pacific? And the only answer that comes to mind is fishing. Any remote place has predators.
Owino is closest to the outside world. Enrique fears that foreign fishing vessels have stripped the reef of its sharks.
If there is fishing at Owino, what's next? Are these foreign fleets going to start hitting Henderson and then Ducie, which is a totally pristine place?
To the team and many islanders, the solution is clear. Create a marine reserve, protecting the entire Pitcairn archipelago.
A marine reserve is an area that we set aside without fishing to allow marine life to recover.
It may help the Pitcairners as well. Tourism. Not rare stops for island trinkets and bounty lore, but ecotourism built on a protected marine reserve.
We're talking about global recognition for a unique marine environment, a completely new set of economic alternatives, including ecotourism, that would bring new life to the island.
And if the Pitcairners agree, it would be the largest in the world. Enrique and Heather Bradner of the Pew Environment Group discussed the idea with the islanders.
To the members I've worked in exploring this concept of a large marine reserve here together.
I'm certainly in favour of the reserve because I think that, you know, what have we really got to lose is not being.
Maybe having a marine reserve and building a tourism industry is one way that we can create a future.
I think this marine protected area, it makes perfect sense to them when they think about it. They're extremely proud of where they live. Okay, we got a new waypoint. Here we go. Closer people are connected to the land, the more conservation makes sense to them.
The plans are in motion. Already a new team is mobilizing to investigate Mike Fay's rat sighting on Henderson. It's the first of many steps toward protecting all the Pitcairn Islands and preserving their timeless waters.
A marine reserve could completely change the image that people have about the Pitcairn archipelago. We could go beyond the bounty and understand that the Pitcairn Islands harbor some of the last healthy environments left in the ocean. And they are so valuable that not knowing about that would be a tragedy.
I really do think Pitcairn has a chance. I'm sure there have got to be other mad people like me that will want to come back for this lifestyle and create a future.
I'm Stan Tarrant. For 65 years, this site served as the headquarters of Pacific American Fisheries Company. Now I'm going to tell you the story of PAF. Pacific American Fisheries was a Bellingham canning company. I like to think that as I'm sitting here right now, it would have been 100 years old. I joined PAF in 1930. In fact, I worked for PAF for 35 years, excluding 2.5 years of Army service, but I started as a bookkeeper at PAF and had various jobs after that. I was president for 10 years, and I really have fond memories of my relationship there, particularly with all the fine people I was permitted to work with, and we were just one big happy family. Galen Byrie was a part of that family.
No, it was a big outfit, and it's a good outfit. It was, when payday came, they had a slogan, PAF was pay after fishing. And that was a pretty good slogan too, because that's when payday was. It's said that one new family had just moved to the area, and when the little kids said their prayers at night, they always included, and God bless the PAF.
Anyway, they had the biggest salmon cannery in the world there. They had a 19-line cannery right there in Bellingham near the office. They had salmon traps. They bought salmon traps. They inherited salmon traps with some plants they bought. And then they got interested in Alaska. They decided to buy canneries in various locations to spread the risk so that there would be no time that every place in Alaska would be poor fishing. And as a result, at the time I went there in 1930, I think we were operating 12 canneries, but we had about 30 locations. Of course, life at the canneries varied according to location, but most of the canneries were in isolated locations where they merely went in and right from the raw land started a little community. In order to house their people who they needed in the operation, of course, they had to have places for them to stay. So it wound up usually by forming a little village. And being far away, especially in the early days, from transportation and communication, the companies had to provide everything. They imported the labor. They provided the transportation from down Seattle or San Francisco because they couldn't find enough local people to do the jobs up there. In the early days, some of the old salmon companies had beautiful sailing ships. I used to see them in Bristol Bay in the 1920s, and some of them were the Starfleet of San Francisco, the Star of Lapland, the Star of Russia, the Star of Falkland, and so forth. Those vessels made a beautiful picture, and they performed very well. They were an economical mode of transportation. And surprisingly, they made pretty good time going to Alaska. Once in a while, they'd get blown off course. In fact, I guess it happened more than once. They were almost blown clear over to the Hawaiian Islands on sometimes. And those ships were manned by the fishermen, as were the steamers, who were the sailors. The fishermen worked as sailors, but on the sailing ships, the fishermen really had a challenge. They had to furl and handle the sails and climb all over the ship. All in all, it was a way of life. It's gone now, but I'm sure a lot of people have fond memories of it. Fishermen were varied nationalities, but Predominantly, they were either Scandinavian or Italian, and back in the 20s and 30s, of course, early 30s, our cannery workers who, that term designates those workers who actually clean the fish and fill the cans and do that sort of thing. They were hired under what we then called the China contract. It was a throwback from the old days when a China contractor provided all of the labor, that's the labor necessary to operate a cannery. And that was figured out by the company and the China contractor himself. And then, depending upon the number of men required and so forth, a rate of pay was agreed upon. Contrary to some of the rumors, in some cases they might have been true, but the workers, most of them, received good treatment under this system. The pay, as it was everywhere in those days, was quite low, but the China contractor usually was quite conscientious about selecting good men and taking care of them because his pay depended upon the success of the canning at the cannery, and that's how he got paid. So he saw to it that the men were quite well taken care of. And in the wintertime, sometimes they were broke. Why, he would pay them a little money or advance the money, and it was a fairly good system. I was up there when we were using nothing but sail, of course, and we used sailboats, not through choice, but because we had to, up until 1951, 52. Pacific American Fisheries boats were white boats, and they were painted mast color or yellow, dark yellow inside. And they were choice boats. They were recognized all over as being some of the best. Our boats were about 31, 32 feet long. The wooden hull, it was a double-ender. It had a steamed oak ribs, and it had a keel made out of, well, tulip wood was one that we used, and then they had oak and various hardwoods. But these steamed oak ribs were the thing that held it together. And then we had, in the early days, Port Orford cedar planking, so the boats were very well made, and our boats in particular were made down in Oregon, and we'd ship them up to Alaska on our steamer on deck. When the fisherman showed up, he had his partner with him. The partner was called a boat puller, and the captain was a man to whom the boat had been issued, and it was up to him to get a good partner, or he probably wouldn't get a job the next year. He was given a mast and a boom for the sail and a sprit for the sail, which was a lighter stick or spar that was used to make the sail bigger by poking it up into the corner and then fastening the bottom of the sprit to the mast. We also issued the fishermen a tent. They slept in a little tent up in the forward or forecastle end of the boat. It wasn't certainly a real bedroom, but at least they could put their deerskin hide down there, which most of them used underneath some kind of a mattress, maybe an air mattress or none at all. And this tent enclosed them in that little space up in the front end of the boat. They also got what we called a Swede stove. It was a copper pressure kerosene-fired single-burner stove that they made their coffee on. And they had to cook in the boat, so they'd leave the cannery in those early days to be out on the grounds at 6 o'clock Monday morning, and they didn't come back until 6 o'clock Saturday night, and they had to cook and do everything out in that boat in that time without coming to the cannery. This Swede stove burned kerosene, so they each had to have something to get those stoves started. They didn't start very well out in the cold weather with kerosene, so each one of them got a pop bottle full of alcohol, wood alcohol, and they'd use that to help start the stove. And then another thing we gave them, the doctor used to put that up, were pop bottles full of hand wash, which was nothing more or less than carbolic acid and water. And that was to prevent their getting infected hands in the boat, which was quite common. And to prevent that, they used this carbolic wash on their hands. And also they used to bring ladies' hose with them, silk hose, and put around their wrists where the oilskins would chafe their wrist. They got a net. At that time we were fishing linen nets. They were issued 2 shackles of net. A shackle is 75 fathoms long and 28 meshes deep. They got 2 of those shackles of net made of linen. But one of the most necessary things, of course, was the food. And that itself was quite an event. The issuance of food, the men lined up at the mess house or the warehouse where the mess supplies were stored, and the steward, generally, the cannery steward, would come out and they would issue the supplies to the fishermen. And in most cases, the supplies were put in a salmon box, and they were issued all kinds of things that could be kept in the boat without spoiling. And like, for instance, Scandinavians, they got some special stuff like that hardtack. We call them phonograph records, round hardtack. And also there was, of course, no fresh meat. They might get some, take it out for the first day or something, but they got canned meats of all kinds, everything under the sun. I didn't realize how much stuff could be canned. And the Italian boats, of course, they wanted lots of spaghetti and olive oil and that sort of thing, and they were issued Romanello cheese and Campbell's soup. Everybody got soup, and we got butter and eggs and that sort of thing. And also cooking gear. We gave them a Columbia River stew pot, they called it, named after the Columbia River boats. That's pretty much the story of how the fishermen lived out there. It was not comfortable. You can realize these are open boats with no facilities of any kind. They were always damp and wet because the boat was always wet, and their beds would get damp. But they went out with wool clothing and everything, but it was a tough life, particularly when they went out there from Monday morning till Saturday night without ever going ashore. They had to pull these nets in by hand and pick the fish out of them, and it was really tough work. And then if they had no wind, they had to use oars. They got 2 sets of 14-foot ash oars that weighed heavily, and they had to propel the boat by oars. Sometimes they'd have to row all day if they had no wind at all. Monkey boats were small gas or diesel-powered boats, usually around 35, 40 feet long, that would go out and perform 2 functions. One was to make sure they were around in case a bad storm or distress sailboat got in trouble. They would rescue them. A sailboat might go on the beach and have to be pulled off, and the monkey boats were alerted to the location of boats most of the time. They also were allowed to tow a loaded boat to the tally scow. They were not allowed to tow empty boats around the fishing grounds from one good fishing spot to another, or go prospecting, towing boats to places where there might be better fishing. They were not allowed to do that. Tally scow was merely a place where the tallymen lived and where the fishermen could get hot soup and coffee and what have you at the time they were delivering their fish, and do anything else that might make them more comfortable. That it was largely, the tally scow was largely to house the people who counted the fish out there and who saw to it that the fish were taken care of. On the Alaska Peninsula and elsewhere in Alaska, traps were probably a primary source of fish at one time. And traps were in most of the districts, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak, Prince William Sound, and southeastern Alaska particularly. There were 2 kinds of traps. PAF had traps out on the Alaska Peninsula, for instance. They were all pile traps. The pile traps were generally located near some point where the fish traveled, and as far as the construction goes, they were formed by driving a long line of piling called the lead from the beach end out into the deeper water. And then there was a system of wire formations called the heart, and the pot and the spillers. Those are parts of a trap. The fish would hit this lead and follow it out toward the deeper water, trying to get away from the wire, chicken wire we would call it, but it was trap wire, like chicken wire. And that was hung from the piling on top, above the surface of the water, down the water to the bottom. And it performed a wall of netting that the fish could not go through. And so they would follow that lead up to the hearts, which were V-shaped projections from the lead, which allowed the fish to go in, but they couldn't back out without confusing themselves with the hearts. Sometimes they had two sets of hearts. Well, then they'd keep going farther out, and they'd get into the pot where it was enclosed wire again, and they had various means of getting the fish in and out of these pots into the spillers. And the fish were then brailed or fish dipped out of these spillers and taken to the cannery. Generally, we had one watchman who had a little house we sat on the trap called a trap shack. In southeastern Alaska particularly, another type of trap was used called a floating trap. In that case, the trap was constructed along the lines of a pile trap, but it did not have wire clear down to the bottom. It could be used in deep water. The wire was hung in such shape that it formed a sort of a box-like enclosure with a bottom in it. A floating trap, for instance, was assembled on the beach. They build the frame out of big spruce logs and get the frame all put together. Then they have to make the wire to fit the trap. They make that up in the warehouse ashore, out on the deck or dock. And that wire was brought out, and the hanging of the trap was done right out on the beach. So the trap frame would float, and they would work underneath and get this wire all assembled under the trap. And in the final analysis, after they got all the wire fastened and the lines and all the other attachments put on, they'd simply float the trap out of there and tow the intact trap, completely manufactured trap, to the location. It was anchored with very heavy anchors and cables, and serviced similar to a pile trap. The tenders would come alongside and brail the fish out of that floating trap in the same manner as a pile trap, except of course the pile trap was stuck up out of the water, and they'd have a little different type of gear and operate in a little different manner in getting the fish out. One thing about salmon traps, the age of the fish was known because they were alive in the trap until they took them out. And when you took them out, they all came out at the same time, so you had a complete fix on the age of the fish before they were processed. And the fish had to be processed within a time limit. I think it was 36 hours. They had to be preserved in some manner. So from that point of view, trap fish were considered very fine fish, if not the best from the standpoint of quality control. Set nets are merely a fixed form of gillnet fishing. At one time, set nets were reserved primarily for widows and orphans and handicapped people who couldn't go out in a boat and catch fish. That was an accepted thing in Bristol Bay, for instance, that the issuance of set net sites or their use was confined to people who couldn't really handle a drift gillnet boat. That changed, however, particularly with the advent of power. I don't know why, but when power came in, of course, they got a lot more different types of fishermen and naturally different types of gear. And set nets, the people began to occupy set net sites that were not handicapped persons and what have you. It was open to anybody who had a site. PAF, along with other companies, operated in a large number of purse seiners, various districts. Essentially, purse seining consists of a net or a bag that has lead line on the bottom and floats on the top. Used to be cork, or now they use plastic floats. And they have a skiff take hold of one end of the seine and tow it around in a pull it around in a circle behind the boat, and then take the end back aboard the boat, so you have a big sack-like net strung out behind you, and the bottom has rings on it. The bottom is weighted down with lead like a gill net, and they have a line through these rings called a purse line, and when they surround what they think is a school of fish, they draw the purse line through these rings and form a purse. The bottom is pursed up, so you have a bag in effect, and you have the fish confined in that bag. Then they move the boat and the bag close together and dip the fish out of that bag, called brailing with a brailer, and load it aboard the ship. The iron chink was a name given to a machine that gutted and cleaned and cut the head and tail off the fish. We had a line of what we called slimers at a sliming table with lots of water and brushes, all gloves and perfectly sanitary operation. They would scrub the inside of the fish and examine each one by itself and make sure that it was properly cleaned and all blood and everything removed. And they went over into what we called a filler bin. And there the fish would fall onto the feed table, which was a row of fingers that ran through slots that picked up the fish, and they were horizontally fed into the filler machine. And the filler would allow one piece of fish the size of the can to slide into the can and compress it so that the can would leave the filler with 16 ounces or 15 and a half ounces, whatever the weight was. From there it would pass over an inspection table where they had generally 2, 4, or 6 people, depending, who would inspect all these cans as they passed by. And if there are any cans that were improperly filled, or if they had meat hanging over the top that might impair the seam that would be put on them, they were checked again. They went through a salter on the filling machine. They automatically salted. A 1-pound tall can got a 1/4 ounce of salt that fell into the can as the fish were put in. The next machine it went into would be the clincher. It went from the clincher into the vacuum machine. The can then would leave that vacuum machine and either roll or be pulled by a cable to the end of the line, we call it, where it was fed into coolers. These coolers were trays, slotted trays. In fact, they were made out of band iron with spaces between so the cans couldn't fall out. 168 tall cans would go in, as I remember. And when the tray was filled, another tray was put on top of it until they had the proper number of trays that would fit into the retort where they were cooked. And then when the retort was filled with these cold cans, why, the doors were closed and sealed, and then the cooking process started. They cooked for 90 minutes. A tall can would be cooked for 90 minutes. The temperature is ordinarily around 242 degrees. Then the steam would be blown off the retorts, and after all the steam was out and it was safe to open the doors, they were taken out and the cans were cooled. Looking back, and particularly now, I often consider how important Pacific American Fisheries was to Bellingham, and the fact that losing the company meant a lot to all the people of Bellingham, and we had a fine organization there. We had good people who were experienced, and they loved the company, and they got along fine. In fact, hardly a day went by that someone wouldn't comment on the fact that PAF had been important to them personally. So many people from Bellingham went to Alaska. A lot of young people went up there, and they really financed their education by working in the canneries and so forth. And of course, we used a huge amount of material and labor. We did a lot of work there in the wintertime when they had the traps and what have you, and the Puget Sound operation going. It was a very, very important industry in Bellingham. The stockholders of PAF decided to liquidate the company in 1965 because of lack of confidence in the industry. It was a sad time for those of us who worked there, but the foresight of the company's founders is very evident today. For example, each one of the 3 major PAF plants at King Cove, Excursion Inlet, and Petersburg now produces as much salmon as the entire PAF did in 1964, and the Alaska salmon resource is as strong as it was 100 years ago. I like to think that the legacy of the PAF will last a long time, and that future generations will continue to benefit from this great resource.